to increase the profitability and leverage in your business. Who would want that? So guys, without much further ado, let me go ahead and introduce our speaker tonight, Ian King. And why am I having a feedback? So Ian King has started his profession coaching, his profession as a coach and an entrepreneur, that is in 1980. So in 1986, with over 100 elite athletes in his care, Ian has formed one of the world's first athlete preparation companies called King Sports International, KSI. So KSI has helped athletes, teams, and coaches fulfill their potential at the elite level in over 30 sports and over 20 different countries through the last 9 Olympic cycles. So guys, tonight you're going to be hearing from someone who's one of the most successful in the country. He's a very successful entrepreneur and just so much knowledge out there. So ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Ian King. And Ian, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Josie, and thank you for the invitation to speak to this group. And I welcome and thank everybody who is on the call today. So, Josie, can you just give me feedback on my audio? Is it good?
It's very good. Thank you.
Excellent. So we're right to rock and roll, Josie?
We are right to rock and roll.
Excellent. So before I get started, I want to just lay down a few things. First of all, I'm going to encourage you to be interactive. And Josie's taught me how to use a chat panel, and I've been practicing over the last 5 minutes. So at any point in time, if you have a question or a comment, I want you to go straight. I would prefer that interaction than any other sort of polite deference. And if I miss the question, hopefully Joe's been on the topic because I might have my another screen overlaid over it. So that's the first thing I wanted to share. Second thing I wanted to share is, if you're on the call with me tonight, I want you to be completely on the call with me tonight. If you are planning to multitask, I would encourage you to perhaps go and participate in the other activity that you're multitasking on rather than this one, because my expectation and my goal, my measurement of my success is for your 100% focus. And I want you to be very present in your mind. I want you to be really reflecting on the things that we go over, and I can judge that by the level of interaction. The third thing I wanted to say is that I will plan to at least start on topic. And the topic that I've been given, as Josie said, and I'll bring that screen up now, is profitability and leverage for fitness and health practitioners. So if at any stage in time we feel the need to leave that topic, we certainly will. But my initial plan is to stay talking that topic. And finally, what I'll be doing is expressing my opinion. So this is not an opinion or reflective of any other organisation. This is my opinion. So I hope to be very straight with you tonight. I hope to speak very candidly with you tonight, and I trust that you appreciate that. It is my opinion I will be sharing. Okay, so I'm going to open the floor very quickly with any questions from the get-go. I'm just looking at that chat panel real quick and see if we've got any comment from the get-go. And at this stage, I'm going to assume there's not. So let's get started. So Josie gave a very brief introduction, and I appreciate that very brief introduction. So just to fill in a few spots as to where I've come from, in 1978, I completed high school and was not expecting to get an opportunity to go to university, so I didn't plan for that, but it turned out that I was given an offer. And so when I took advantage of that, I selected a course in 1980 that was... I had no idea whether you could get work from it. I had no intention of getting work from it. I simply went there out of a simple desire to learn the best way to train. So I was very focused on finding answers, for the most part for myself, on how to train. And as a result of my focus on training, within the first year at university, I started to attract the following. By 1982, I was teaching formally to students and staff at the university, and by 1984 I was teaching to every industry practitioner, every gym instructor in my state at that time, the first accredited course of its kind in Queensland, travelling the state. I hadn't graduated yet. By 88, I was teaching the newly introduced strength and conditioning. It was then called this Australasian Strength and Conditioning program. And in 89, I took over as the executive director of that organisation. So from an educational perspective, I've been focused on sharing what I've learned through there. And I left that organisation in that role in about 96, 97. And in 99, I commenced my own online education. I'll come back to that in a minute. From an athlete training perspective, as Josie said, by 86, I had over 100 athletes, and I had no intentions of starting a business or no intentions of even attracting athletes commercially per se. But when I had so many athletes, I thought I'd better turn it into business. So I'm one of those service providers whose business originated from simply helping people in this area, helping them be the best they could be in athletics or in sport. And my niche is in working with Olympic athletes. So, as Josie said, I've worked through the last 9 Olympic cycles. I've not only seen a lot of athletes, seen a lot of events, seen a lot of sports, but I've seen a lot of changes come and go. From a business perspective, it's given me a unique perspective, because when I started in 1980, the word strength and conditioning had not been coined. The word personal trainer had not been coined. There was no such role. So I created demand for the services in the absence of a job description. The job descriptions came along later and didn't help me because they created stereotypes. But what I did is I put my head down and I worked really hard, and I was the hardest working person I knew through to the early 90s. And in the early 90s, as I was heading towards my mid-30s, I said to myself, well, when I grew up, I believed that as you head towards halfway through your life, you'd be well established if you simply worked hard. And I took stock of my situation, and I realized that if I stopped working for one day, I was one day behind on my bills. Despite the fact that I was the highest paid person in the world in my newly created profession, I had no assets to show for it. So this was a little bit of a shock to me. And I then began a journey of self-discovery in the area of financial education, business education, etc. So I went on a pretty extensive search from the early 90s onwards, and I discovered a lot and I learned a lot. I'll give you an example. I was exposed to Robert Kiyosaki's cash flow quadrant through actually one of his colleagues at the time before it was even published. So I got to see this quadrant before it was even published. If you haven't read Rich Dad, I encourage that you do. Great book. And what became very obvious to me is that in the cash flow quadrant, and I'll go back one, Robert identified 4 main sources of income. And the first was an employee. And I started as an employee and then moved very quickly to self-employed when I started my own business. So I was on the left-hand side of the quadrant. And Michael Gerber talks about, in the E-Myth Revisited, talks about the entrepreneurial fit, and that quite often service providers, self-employed people in a job say, I can do better than this. My boss is an idiot. And they start their own business and realize that their new boss themselves is a big idiot than their old boss was. So for the most part, moving from the E quadrant to the S quadrant does nothing more than give you a little bit of flexibility of when you're working. But it doesn't really change your situation. You are still selling your time for money. Now, everybody in the health and fitness industry as a service provider is on the left-hand side of the quadrant. And that has some implications. At some point in time, I've found, as I did myself, that the majority, if not all, of practitioners will look around themselves and say, I've worked really hard, I'm time poor, my income's capped, what's going on here? And at that point in time, they might get exposed to similar information that I did and realize that if you're on the left-hand side of the quadrant, very little of the wealth is distributed. If you're on the right-hand side of the quadrant, a lot of wealth is distributed. And yet 95% of the population, as a generalization, is on the left-hand side of the quadrant, because that's all we're trained to do through the formal education in the Western world. So what I sought to do was I sought to move to the right-hand side of the quadrant. And it is a common transition for a person to go from employee to self-employed to business person and move down from there. But what I learned, and what I've learned a lot in the decades since is that the challenge of successfully moving to the right-hand side of the quadrant when you've got 20 years of education invested in the left-hand side of the quadrant is not that easy. And as we go through tonight's presentation, I will explain to you why it's not that easy and give you some empathy for those working in the health and fitness industries. Now, I'm just going to pause and say, Josie, do we have a challenge with sharing the screen?
Okay, so your screen?
Okay. Is my screen not being shared?
No, I can't see. Why? It should.
Okay, I'm going to hit it again. I'll hit the share screen.
Okay.
You got it? So good. I apologise. I've been working through that without checking my screen. So I'm just going to go briefly back through that again. That was just when I was speaking about my business background, my company background. And by the way, I registered this company 31 years ago. So I've been in business as a company director for 31 years and a practitioner for 37, consistently in this industry. So I've got a little bit of experience, but experience doesn't guarantee success in line. Quite often you're just repeating and doing the same thing. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the purpose of work. So for me, it's not acceptable to work for money. I understand that in the early stages of your working life, sometimes you just got to put food on the table, and I get that. But at some point in time, if you don't shift to working for a purpose, life can get a little bit less than happy. And the pursuit of happiness is considered to be, in most philosophies, the purpose of life or the main focus of life. So it's important that you are working for a purpose. And obviously, as a health practitioner or a fitness practitioner, for most people, that is their purpose, to serve people through their knowledge and their service. So I talked about the cash flow quadrant, and I talked about employee, self-employed, business owner, and investor. I talked about how 5% of the wealth is on the left-hand side of the quadrant and 95% of the wealth is on the right. So people in our industries are capped in their income and start to wonder, what do I need to do to get on the right-hand side of the quadrant? And that's all we'll be talking about tonight, because it's not as smooth and as easy as we would have hoped. The normal transition is to go from employee to self-employed up to business owner, etc. So I'm going to give an example, and this is one industry. Obviously, this is the fitness industry, and I was intrigued to stumble upon this article. It was the details. It's a 2016 article, and I thought, this is great. They're talking about money. They're providing some financial education, really lacking in our industries. So I had a look at it, and what I see is a great reflection of where the thinking's at, where the head's at in the personal training industry. So they talked about instability and unpredictability. There's no reason that a personal trainer can't make great money, afford health insurance, to save for retirement, and create even more freedom in their lives. And I wondered what they meant by great money, because if great money means being able to afford your health insurance, we've probably got a different definition of great money. See, as a parent, and I'm taking not everybody is a parent, I get it, but as a parent, I believe that you need to take $50,000 a year for each child under the age of 18. That's just a generalisation. So if you've got two kids, you're putting aside the first $100,000 before tax, and if you're making, say, $150,000, you're living on $50,000, you and your partner, and that's not easy. So I think they're probably thinking a little bit small, but we'll continue looking at the thoughts. They're talking about fulfillment and financial opportunity, why it's got such a high rate of turnover. What they did get right, as I said, it's an appointment-based career. So they're selling their time. They got that right. And then they talk about the solutions. So I was very intrigued to look at their solutions. And the solutions they offered, and this is an American article, 2016, National Strength and Conditioning Association, they offered some concepts to develop multiple revenue streams. And it's a great concept. Even talking about multiple income streams is good. And then they talk about extracting more value. And I did question that word, but that's a subject in itself. They talk about supplement sales, equipment and product sales, T-shirts and apparel. And that was the first one. Then the second one was building a team. The third one was exploring group training. And the fourth one was online. So we will come back and talk about each of those if there's any interest to do so a little bit more, because I have an opinion on many of those. As you can imagine, I've experienced most of these things that they're talking about during the years. I can tell you basically the ups and downs of all of those. So the first thing I'm going to say is this. it's not simply a matter of having multiple income streams. I want people to have a minimum of 3 income streams in my industry. I want them to have a minimum of 3 income streams. But I strongly want one of them to be leveraged. And therefore, if you're selling some merchandise for yourself, you're selling some supplements for yourself, in the way most people do it, for example, there's no leverage there. So what I'm going to do before I launch on the next section, Josie, I'm going to try and avoid the challenge I had there before and go back, if I can, to the panel. Josie, do we have any questions popping up?
Oh, yeah, there is a question here, Ian. So a question from Alan.
So, Josie, how do I see the panel? How do I see the panel? I'm not getting the thing
on the chat.
Yeah, I want to see. I got the chat now. Yep.
Can you see the chat? There's a question from Alan Fu.
Not seeing the chat now.
Can you see? If you go at the bottom, and there's the chat screen. Yeah.
So I've got participation, new share, remote, more, maybe it's in more. Yeah, got it. It was hitting more. Okay, Alan. Oh, it's a bit old. That one updated. Okay, where was Alan's question? Would you approach personal trainers gym with their products? Okay, so okay. You know what I'm going to do here, Alan? I'm going to take a moment. I'm just going to share this with you. How would I say this, Alan? Let me think of how to say this. I would want to ensure, Alan, that you understand the industry and you understand the people involved. So just give me a little bit longer presentation and I'll come back to that. How would that be? Alan, would that be okay? I want to answer your question, but I think it's a bit premature and that's a subject in itself. So if I click on the red button, that won't send it away forever. That'll just pop the screen away. Is that right, Josie? Yep.
That's right. It's fine. Your slide's showing. By the way, Ian, Alan is actually a nutritionist, bachelor in nutrition, and also he's a fitness trainer.
Excellent. Excellent. So he's in the industry. It's fantastic. Appreciate that. So what I'm doing is I'm still focusing on the person who is looking in the looking zone potentially. So I'm not looking at meeting Alan's needs. I'm not looking at meeting anyone's needs other than the people who are looking at this stage. So in my travels, the 2 most common solutions I find for people is they believe that opening their own facility is the holy grail, or hiring and expanding a team of providers would be the other equal opportunity. So I just wanted to touch on that very briefly. Are those 2 solutions industrial revolution, old age, or new age? So let's go back on it again. Is opening your own facility or expanding a facility, in other words, a footprint, a shop front, bricks and mortar, or developing a service team, and no different than, say, your lawyer, he has a team of lawyers working under him, your broker has a team of... Is that old technology? Is that old economy? Or is that still an acceptable new way to do it? And that's a question, and I'm going to look for chat responses. Alex thinks old. Good. We've got 1 person participating. That's good, Alex. I appreciate Alex. Old from Carol. So we've got 2 people playing. That's great. So I'm going to talk to those 2 people. Oh, we've got Amanda. Thank you, Amanda. Amanda's going to play. She thinks it's old. And Aaron, welcome from Ireland, Aaron. Great to have you. We've got David Carpentier. Welcome from Belgium. Kim Parker. Everyone's too smart. There we go. Cecilia, Kath, Sheena, fantastic. We've got about 10 people playing. This is great. Pete Turnbull, thank you. Excellent. So it would appear, Kate Ginzel and Catherine, and you've read my mind. I'm just going to pop this down. It's really old. It's really, really old, because I can imagine in the industrial age, if you had factories, you could measure your wealth by how many factories you had. And if you had workers, you could measure your wealth by how many workers you had. And the whole educational system, according to some, was developed between some Russian influences and some US influences to create workers in the factory, full stop. That was the purpose of education. And if you look at the absence of financial education, you'd have to see some rationale for that theory. It's really old world, but I am amazed by how many people go to that as their solution. So let's look at what could be happening here. Let's talk about Uber. Uber is possibly the world's largest taxi company. It has no vehicles. When was the last time you went into an Uber office and spoke to an Uber sales team member? Airbnb. When was the last time you visited an Airbnb office and spoke to one of their salespeople? Facebook. When was the last time you even saw a billboard ad, let alone a bricks and mortar building? And I could go on and I could go on. Now, my attitude is this. If a health and fitness practitioner is continuing to look for these solutions, there must be something that they know that all these people who've started these businesses don't know. And I don't know if that's on track. So let's get an understanding why the new economy is expanding this direction. And it's not just the availability of the internet. Obviously, it does involve the internet because they're all internet-connected businesses. But it's not defined by the internet. The internet is just accelerated. What are some of the things? Now, I'm going to leave these all up here. There's the internet. Now, secondly, there's cost of wages. Now, I want to talk about this for a moment. We've had things made in China for a long time, but as as a society expects more in their wages, the cost of production goes up. The cost of production goes up. This is why manufacturing is dead in Australia. It's dead in the US. It's dead in many countries as well because the standard of living is so high. People aren't going to work for wages that allow the profit margin. So the good news about your economy is your standard of living might be coming up, but the bad news about your economy is the cost of wages is going up. It is not commercially effective for the majority of businesses to employ people in your residence, in your country. So, and if you question that, talk to anybody who's employing people. Then there's compliance costs. So the government imposes compliance costs to protect the worker. And the more socialistic the country, the more so. But even if it's in America, which is less socialistic, they've still got some compliance costs, like payroll tax, that can just kill a business. There's land costs. Now, those land costs pushes up. You pay more for the rental. There's the infrastructure. The energy cost of running a footprint is prohibitive in many cases. So the new age models are more cost-effective models, higher profit margin due to lower costs of operation and also lower risk. So let's talk about some risk. Marriott. I want to talk about the Marriott hotel chain, one of the most respected businesses in my mind because I love their excellence. I love the way that if you have a problem in a Marriott and you go and talk to them, that they not only want to fix it for you, they all want to go the extra mile. And that's Marriott training. Now, there are some hotels in the Marriott chain that drop down from that, but as a whole, they are, for me, the best hotel chain in the world. So I had the opportunity to be sitting in the chef's kitchen in a special meal with about 12 of us in the room, and they turned the kitchen into a restaurant. It would cost about $250,000 to do on a one-off event. I was just fortunate to be invited in there, and I got a great insight into it. And what I didn't realise is that the business of the Marriott no longer owns the hotels. Now, the family still hold a few, but generally speaking, they divested their assets in the 1980s. Why? Because owning the asset and owning the business model nearly brought both divisions down. They simply use investors' money, hotel owners' money, and they partner with them to provide the management services. And they do that to reduce their risk. So one of the reasons these new business models have grown is because of the risk distribution. And the Marriott is a great example. And they did that back in the 1980s. Now, on the other side, most health and fitness practitioners are working and taking the earned income that they're creating and using that to pay the rent and pay the salaries. And I know there'd be a few of you on the call today that know exactly what I'm talking about. So let's take a reality check for a moment. There's something that's standing in the way of your average health practitioner or fitness practitioner developing leverage income, moving to the right side of the quadrant. There are some very serious limitations, and if you don't appreciate them, then you will struggle working with them. So I've identified 7. I consider the top 7 limitations. And this is what I'm talking about with Alan. I really want everyone to take a moment and have an empathy and an appreciation for where these practitioners are coming from, because I know that's my background, and I deal with these people on a daily basis. Number one, absolutely zero financial, sales and marketing or business training in their professional education. Absolutely none whatsoever. And that article I showed you before was the first time in nearly 40 years that I've seen anything, and it wasn't that good. Number two, an aversion for selling. I'll give you an example. One of my business partners was doing his business, and his mentor at the time sat him down and said, "What are you, a salesperson or a coach?" And when my business partner said, "Well, I'd like to think that I've got more ability than just be one. I think I've got the ability to be perhaps the two." That coach walked out on him, stood up from the table, walked out of the meeting straight away, and didn't speak to him. Now, a decade later, that same coach that was disgusted by his behavior came back and said, "In hindsight, you were doing the right thing and I was an idiot," which was a great admission on his part. Now he's virtually unemployed and virtually broke. And I'm not saying that there's a direct correlation, but he's certainly had a life lesson. And that's what I find at some point in time, most practitioners who are selling their time for money will have that lesson, but will it be too late? Now, the third one's a big one, a concern about profiting from their recommendations to clients. Now, I believe this comes in large part from the social desire to model the medical profession. And in the medical profession, the most coordinated, controlled working union in the world, all their sales are given over to the pharmaceutical industry. Their exchange for the right to be a doctor involves handing over all the recommendations to the profit margin of the pharmaceuticals. So when a practitioner, a health and fitness practitioner, is feeling guilty about taking the money from their client, it's really quite ironic, because even the medical doctors, even the medical practitioners are creating a profit for somebody, even though it might not be for themselves. They're still serving a master. Now, what I also don't understand, if you're a health and fitness practitioner and you're taking their money for your recommendations in training or health, what is the difference if you're taking their money for example? But this is a real challenge, and it's not about to go away. So I just wanted to raise that. Number 4, what will my buddies think? That's a big one. I won't dwell on that, but that's pretty straightforward. Conformity is one of the greatest killers of human potential in the world. And I think Rollo May made the opposite of courage is not cowardice, it's conformity. There's a lot of talk on that. And if you listen to Phil Nightingale's The Stranger's Secret from 1952 or 55, thereabouts, you'll hear a lot of quotes on that subject. It's great audio to listen to. Number 5, a propensity to imitate business models highly promoted in their industry. People will do what their buddies are doing, in essence. 6, the cup is full. The higher the education that someone goes to, the harder it is for them to empty their cup. So when someone says, "I'm university trained," I almost cringe. There's obviously some great benefits to university training, but there's also some downsides. And finally, running out of time due to all the above reasons, late realization, then asking themselves, can I do it? Is it still possible? So what I'm going to do there is I'm going to pause for a moment, Josie, and work my technology back to the chat box and see if I've missed anything. So.
Okay. This is a second part of the question of Alan, probably relates to point number 2, or what you just talked about. Do you want me to read it to you?
Yes, please. So if you could just monitor those questions and just interrupt me as soon as they come through.
Okay, so the second part of his question is, how would you approach and share the products with elite athletes, upcoming elite athletes? Oh, that's probably different.
Okay, so it's the same concept, and I will come back to it. So we're going to hold that. Were there any other questions relevant to where we are at the moment?
Yeah.
No other questions, Josie, for the moment?
No, not for the moment. Yeah.
Okay, so this is what's going to happen. Nearly everybody in the health and fitness industry is going to look for leverage at some point in time. The majority of them will look too late, and the majority of them will look in the wrong places. But here's some of the things to consider when you're looking for leverage. Number 1, product or services. For me, it's no comparison. the leverage potential from a product far exceeds the service. I wouldn't even call a service leverage per se. Now, if I bought a taxi license in the old days when there was such a thing, and I paid $250,000 for it, which is the average price in our country, and then I'd hire drivers to drive for me. Now, I'm no longer in business because Uber have come along, and Uber really isn't paying anybody until they've done their job. So it's completely different. They're not driving around, black and white or yellow cab on a payroll. Their only way to leverage service is on a 100% return basis. If you don't do anything, you don't get paid. Product is far more leverageable. Secondly, longevity. Amazed at how many people do stuff that does not last very long. And I know it's tough to say in advance, and you don't want to be negative about it, but I can look at most ideas and say, yeah, I don't think that's going to last too long, and I'll come back to a few examples later. Then there's risk. I know people who spent up to $15,000 and 2 years learning how to develop an ebook, and by which time the phase or craze had passed, and they didn't make a single ebook or didn't sell a single ebook. So most business options have risks. Most leverage options have risks, whether it's you're buying a lot of stock or whatever it is. Residual potential. Very few leverage options really have residual potential. In other words, if I stop working, whether it's going on holiday for a month, I'm going to still see an income. And I enjoy taking my family overseas for up to 2 months a year, different times, and the income doesn't change because I've had a leverage model with residual. And finally, true leverage. And some things can smell like leverage. They might even look like leverage, but they don't have leverage. And we can get more specific about that if there is a question. So one of the products that I'm a big fan of is the supplement product. But what I want to be real clear about this. The average person selling supplements in the fitness industry is selling them on a sale-by-sale basis. Yes, the margin is high, sometimes between 30 and 50%. But when the transaction is concluded, it is dead and gone. There is no leverage in that whatsoever. So they may be selling a product, but I still don't consider it leverage. They've got an additional revenue income stream. That's it. It's not leveraged. And the same with practitioners selling practitioner brands. There's no leverage to that. You're simply creating another income stream, which is great, but it's not leveraged. So why do people continue to do that? Why do people in gymnasiums around the world sell what everyone else is selling and take, the 10 to 50%, and then it's dead and gone? There's nothing in it more. They do it because everyone else is doing it, or they don't know that there's a better way. The other influence is highly marketed products. I have a colleague. We'll come back to start your own range. One of the great temptations in a supplement solution for practitioners to start your own range, there's a lot of ego in that. And either want to see my face on the bottle or I know more than the other bloke. Let me give you some examples. I have a colleague who started his own range. He has no control of that range whatsoever. He lost control of his company completely. I do not know personally in the fitness industry a single person who's had longevity, whose control of their product range is extended more than 10 years. It almost doesn't work. I'm not saying it can't. There are some exceptions. I don't know them personally, but there are some exceptions. So if I don't know them personally, it's obviously fairly less common. And the other one is to partner with someone. And that takes a little bit less ego, but a little bit more smarts. So let's talk about that. Okay. I'm going to go on the supplement discussion. So, Josie, I'm about to switch gears and go from money to just quickly why I have such an interest in supplements. I'm not sure whether any questions yet.
Okay, yeah, we have a few questions about it. So do you want us to ask a question after your supplement talk?
Yeah, if the questions are relevant to what I've just covered, let's cover them now. If they're relevant to what I'll be covering in a minute, let's hold them back.
Related to products.
Okay, let's do product then. So when I started university in 1980, I started taking individual vitamins and minerals to what I could afford in those days, which wasn't much. And one of my earliest influences was a book that was published in the late 1970s by one of America's first strength coaches called Bill Starr. And it wasn't just a book saying take supplements. It was hyper supplements. The dosages here would stand with any blended supplement recommendations today. So I had a really good influence from the get-go. And he was serious about getting results with athletes, and so was I. I was serious about my own training. So I went from taking the fitty little stuff that I was taking to looking to take higher dosages. But it's not very cost effective when you're buying them individually, as I was at the time. So I had a limitation as far as my income, but also a limitation as far as the product I was using. So I continued. This book was published in 1984, and ironically, if you laid the table of vitamin recommendations beside each other from Bill Starr's book, I would swear it was an open book copy. It was that identical. So to Bill Starr's credit, if you get a chance to look at the table in his book, he was so ahead of his time. This book, another influence of mine, was published in 1989. Now, this was self-published by a Brisbane nutritionist in Australia. He was ostracised by his community for his beliefs on vitamins, but it was high dose. So here am I throughout the 1980s getting exposed to high dose vitamin intake. So I obviously didn't accept it. I did my research, and I've been pursuing the supply of a high dose, high quality vitamin since 1980. Now, as you can imagine, when I stumbled upon a product, an American product in the late 90s, after nearly 20 years of studying, research, experimenting, and with myself as well as with athletes, I could tell what was a good product, in my opinion. And my athletes could tell what was a good product. And so the reason I chose to partner with the company that I did is because after 20 years of real-world pursuit, I'd found a product I trusted, a product that was high quality, high dose, and I could trust that what's in the bottle is on the label. What's in the label and the contents were one and the same. Now, when I was talking to some people about tonight's presentation, they wanted me to touch upon why multivitamins. And another trend in our industry is people take either the latest trends or they try to be smart and put together their own combinations. If I were to identify the top 3 or 4 popular supplements in the market in the Western world, you'd be going things like branched chain amino acids, creatine, fish oils, and a few other things. Now, I don't even use most of those things. I don't use some of the early ones I mentioned with the athletes I work with because they are so less effective for what I need to achieve than the vitamins. So first of all, if we were to survey our industry, we would find the use of broad spectrum multivitamin quite low in our own industry, in the health and fitness industry. And I've been stunned by that because I've been using these things for near on 40 years. But the reality is it's quite low. And there seems to be a lack of an appreciation of vitamins, full stop, and I say vitamins and minerals, but also multivitamin. Now, for me, a multivitamin is a broad spectrum base approach, which you then can supplement if you're committed to and have the budget to do so. So when I'm working with athletes, my approach is I'm not going to talk to you about anything else until we're on the multivitamins. Then we'll start adding. So the multivitamin for me is absolutely non-negotiable. I just wanted to touch base on that. Now let's talk about the role of vitamins. If you haven't watched the vitamin movie, I suggest you do. Now let's take vitamin C as an example. Now I've just said take a molly, and now I'm talking about the individual vitamins. Let's take vitamin C as an example. The general consensus in that movie from the people that were interviewed in the movie is that everybody should be on between 4 and 5 grams a day. Now, the RDA on vitamin C is about 60 milligrams a day. The multivitamins that I use are 400 milligrams a day. They were 600, dropped to 400. The bottom line is even the appreciation and the value of a simple thing like vitamin C has gone away. Now, for the most part, vitamins aren't trademarkable. They're not patentable and the profit margin is not there. But we've also got the suppression of the information because they potentially may remove sales from other industries. And you can read between the lines on that one. And if you question that, I want you to go and study Abram Hoffer's work. That's ABRAM, where he talks about Linus Pauling and how Linus Pauling's work. Linus Pauling, despite being the recipient of 2 independent Nobel and as in non-shared Nobel prizes, was denied. His submissions later in his career were rejected more than once. And it's intriguing to see in my opinion, the effort that have gone to suppress the role of something like vitamin C. And that's what the gentleman I was talking about, Abraham Hoffer. Very interesting history there. And, he was mentored in some regard by Linus Pauling. Now, let's talk about diseases. Now, as we all know, I'm not about to breach industry regulations and start making disease claims. But what I can say is that if you watch the videos on this channel that relate to, say, cancer, you might note the common theme of high-dose vitamin use, and including intravenous use, high-dose vitamin use in these cancer survivors. Now, if in their opinion, complementary medicine plays such a significant role, then perhaps it would play a really significant role in prevention. So what I'm saying is that we really underestimate the role of vitamins in our lives. And it is, in my opinion, because for the large part an unpatentable product, unless you do some formula uniqueness, which most do, and not trendy, not new, not sexy, everyone's moved on. It's boring, it's old world, and we can't make enough money out of it. Now, if and when the pharmaceutical industry run out of things to patent in drug breakthroughs, they will start buying the supplement companies as their next step. But until then, there'll be a continued suppression of supplement recommendations in society, in the Western world, in my opinion. And that's something we can open up more. But I was stunned by the common theme of supplement use in these cancer survivors when I researched this extensively earlier this year, when a colleague was identified having an advanced form of cancer. So when I'm talking to you as a health and fitness practitioner, I want you to understand that selling supplements is not the same as selling supplements. Because if I take Joe Bloggs' product, they're really popular in gyms, and I put them on my shelf, the labels are really nice, and I sell them, it's all over. But I could have a product where when I do a transaction, my customer can be part of a customer program. And that customer program can include call centers during business hours, toll-free, in 20 plus countries. That customer program can involve direct shipping. So my customer has a direct relationship and product to ship from multi-million-dollar warehouses in regions covering most of the world. So I'm not handling the stock, I'm not handling the money. Now, if my client moves away from me, there's a very good chance that they will still remain a customer of mine in nutritional supplement. Now, if I'm selling Joe Bloggs' product over the shelf and it's a manual transaction, just a one-off retail transaction, when they move to another state, another town, another country, they're gone. So there's no leverage in that. I also have a team of scientists working for me that I don't pay, in excess of 60 globally. I have a massive marketing team. I have thousands of sponsored athletes. I have consistency and stability as measured by their performance in the stock market. And I can do business internationally seamlessly. So I don't have to ship the product overseas. I don't have to get compliance in overseas countries. I don't have to deal with overseas currencies, but I can do business in that way. Now, one of the more popular products in the fitness industry imported into Australia is unlikely to have approval for sale in Australia. So there's no insurance coverage, and I have no legal right to sell that product in this country. And this is really common. It's one thing for someone to bring in their product from another country for personal use, but when a practitioner sells that product imported by themselves for sale to their clients, there's a whole new can of worms that they've just opened up. So I don't have those concerns because the product I sell is compliance in all the countries I do business with. Now, if you're not doing business internationally, you are underperforming the possibilities. And even if you're not doing it now, you could set up for a future. Okay, so what we're going to do, Josie, is now we're going to go straight to those questions. So you bring them out in the order that you feel that they're there.
Okay, so we have that second question from Alan, and he says, how would you approach, I know that you have thousands and thousands of customers around the world. So, how would you approach and share products to elite athletes? Sometimes some of them are skeptical probably, and some upcoming elite athletes. So how do you approach athletes, Ian?
So to help a person to grow their base and their product sales base, which we're looking to involve practitioners to give them another income stream, and they are people of influence. So they're actually, in theory, the people with the greatest potential to recommend a product, because if I'm a health and fitness practitioner, my recommendations carry weight. Now, that doesn't mean everyone's going to accept it or take one. My first question to any person at some point in time is, do you take nutritional supplements? And it's a pretty simple flow chart from there. There's only 4 or 5 questions involved. And if they say, no, I think they're expensive urine, my grandmother had a vitamin and died, or whatever story they want to give me, I'll probably say, well, how's the cat? How is your grandfather? How's he doing? And I'll change the subject completely. I don't have time to convince. Now, if they're saying they are taking a supplement, I'll then ask, well, what brand are you taking? How did you get onto it? And what's your product experience with it? And there, if they said, well, I really love it, I'd never leave it, I committed to it for life, then I'd say, how's your cat? How's your grandmother? How's your grandfather? What are you doing on your holidays? But if they said, listen, I'm not taking anything, but I believe I should, or I am taking something, but I don't know if it's doing anything for me, and I say, oh, that's interesting. And then I'd share them with my product experience with this. I found a product which is effective. I was really impressed with it. The people I've given it to had a really good response with it. Is that something you'd be looking at doing? Are you interested in? So for me, it's a flow chart. It's a series of pre-qualification questions. It takes about 30 seconds. And, you might come back to another day or wrap it up in that one, but it's not a complicated question. But let me give you some personal insights. When I take on a new client, and I don't take on many clients, you've got to find me, first of all, and then you've got to be worthy of my time. And I don't mean from an arrogant point of view, but after 40 years of doing this, if you're not an elite athlete who can change the world of sport, then it's going to be hard for me to get motivated. And everybody needs to have a reason to get out of bed in the morning. So I don't raise nutritional supplements until it's organically to that point, until we get to the discussion of nutrition. It's the raised within the discussion of nutrition. And that could take me weeks, it could take me months. In some cases, it might be days, but I just want to let you know that I don't rush. I'm not here to help myself. I'm here to help them. And we'll have a nutritional discussion when they're ready to have it. My philosophy is very Taoist, that when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. So I just want to ensure that premature solicitation will not solve anybody's problems. And if you want me to expand on that subject, that's a quote from Ivan Misner, the founder of Business Network International. How are we going, Josie? Josie, next question.
Okay, so we have an email here from Amanda Sally. It's a great question. So her question is, what supplements and products, shakes or Rev3, do you recommend with competitive athletes? So do you stick to the ones certified for sport, like the Cell Essentials, Procosa, Mint, Perflavanol, Biomega, and Magnical, or do you use all the range? So do you order them from Australia or from the US? And then she says she has a couple of potential customers that compete professionally.
So I'm going to tell you what I do, and I'm going to open up a can of worms here. But you got to understand, this is what I do. This is me talking. This is not me reflecting any company policy. How do I say this without? First of all, the athlete guarantee is only relevant if you've signed the document. Secondly, I've never been an Australian athlete who signed the document or seen the document. The Americans, yes. So even if an Australian stuck to, say, a safe, the so-called safe 3 or 4 products, and there was an issue, they're not covered. So I'm a little bit liberal. I will do what the athlete wants to do. If the athlete feels comfortable breaking out of that range, I will break out of that range. But also keep this in mind. The American athletes receive basically a black label product that we don't get in this country. It's a separate batch. It goes through a little bit more security and a little bit more testing. So an American-sponsored athlete gets a certain product. No one else gets that product. So even our Australian-sponsored athletes do not get the black label product that the American athletes get. Now, I know that there'll be probably someone in corporate getting a bit uncomfortable about me telling you this, but what I'm going to do is just tell you what I do and I tell you what's going on. Because, if we can change the world for the better through, dialogue or whatever, that'd be great. Because I'd love that. But the reality is, at the end of the day, there are very few products that fall in that so-called certified range. And if we were limited to them, I'd feel a bit hamstrung. But I don't make the decision, the athlete does. Now, the WTA, the Women's Tennis Association, do stick to those limited ones. And I can understand they've got a big responsibility. They're 200 athletes, about 160 of them on your sign-up product. But personally, I don't make that decision, the athlete does. Hopefully I've answered that. And yes, there are athletes on the full range. And yes, there are athletes on the full range that are going to go to the next Winter Olympics and get tested. In fact, the athletes I work with are amongst the most tested athletes in Australia, historically. Because typically, historically, we perform so well that the administrative bodies, or the influences on the inverted commas random drug testing, which is not random, athletes that work with me ultimately will get tested more. So I actually have a greater risk due to my reputation of performance superiority. The athletes working with me have got straight away a higher chance of being tested.
Wow. Thank you for that, Ian. So do you want me to go to the next question?
Please.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll answer those questions hard and fast as they want, and this is where we start getting real straight. So go ahead, Josie.
Okay, so a question from Alex Russo in UK. I have PT saying the products are overpriced, and under Joe's example, 300 grams of our protein booster is 20 pounds, but you can buy a kilo of Informed Sport pharma grade whey for 20 pounds.
Excellent. So this is a real simple discussion. You've got people who are price buyers. Now, let's use a gym example. I open up a gym and I want to compete. And the only way I think I can compete is by being cheaper than everyone else. Now, at the end of the day, who's really the winner here? If I'm competing on price in my gym, who's winning? Am I going to give them a good service? Are they going to get any service? Now, nobody really wins. And I don't have time for any company that competes on price. I mean, you've got to be considerate of it, but you should never compete on price, because if price is your primary focus, you won't care what you do as long as you get a sale. I want to work with people who are excellence focused. I want to work with companies like the Marriott, who excellence is the cornerstone of their business operations, full stop. Now, are the Marriott Hotel the cheapest hotel to stay at? No. Does everybody stay at the Marriott Hotel? No. So if someone wants to buy a cheaper product, my attitude is good luck. Fantastic. Knock yourself out. Because if you, and I understand there were times in my life where I was pretty poor and would have done the same thing. So I'm not going to judge that. But this is my attitude. If you're willing to put in your mouth something that you don't know where it was made and how it was made, then you're on your own. Because there is a price to excellence. So I don't get involved in those sorts of discussions. I don't get those comments because I believe we attract the same fears that we have in our own mind, and people don't normally have price questions. Well, not true. I had a man have that to me. One of my low-level athletes, and I took on a referral. He's a former college scholarship athlete, Australian, who went to American college and came back, and I'm working with him. Now, he's a property developer now. His latest project was about $10 million worth. So he was talking to me about the price of stuff. I just gave it to him. I just absolutely gave it to him. Now, if he was a 20-year-old kid, maybe a second-year apprentice getting paid $400 a week and struggling to live, I'd say, listen, buy some teenage vitamins. It's still going to be better than the crap that you're going to get, and I'd leave it at that. So it really comes down to the values of people. There are people who will always be cost-conscious or price buyers, and they have that's their right, and there are people for them. There are other people who say, I really am concerned about what I put in my stomach, because ultimately it's going to go through my intestines and out the other end. And if I do it repetitively, it's either going to make me healthier or it's going to contribute to killing me. And they're the sort of people I'll probably be working with. So I don't have anything more to add on price other than it's not about the price, it's about the value perceived. And that's just a little sales tip. Never talk about price with anybody until they understand the value. You've got to be value-based. And if they're not value-based, then let them go elsewhere. Josie.
Yeah, that is so true. It's the quality, guys. Quality drives demand. So, hey guys, I can't see any other questions here. So if you're a health practitioner and you're a guest on this webinar, I really want to say thank you for jumping on this call. I know that you would have learned so much from Ian's call tonight. And please get back to the person who has invited you to this webinar so they could answer any of your questions. And for all of you that have been on the call, I really appreciate you being here. But I just want to really say thank you so much, Ian. I've learned a lot myself. So now I know how to approach those gym owners, and other health professionals. So thank you. We really appreciate your time. There's just so much value that you've given us tonight. So if there's no other question, we leave it at that. It's already the top of the hour, and really appreciate your time, Ian. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Josie. It was great talking with those who played with me tonight. Trust it was valuable, and we'll see you, somewhere on the road in the future.
Do you have any last wisdom that you want to share, Ian, before we close?
No, I'm just, as I said, if you were here fully present, fully focused, and took something from it, then your time's been rewarded, and there's no shortage of opportunities to succeed. Don't be too concerned about the now. Keep looking to the future and fulfilling the potential that you have. Thank you, Josie.
Great. Thanks, Ian, and good night, everyone.
Thank you.